Lesson 4.1, Scatter Plots. This whole unit is going to look at bivariate data. Just a reminder of just breaking down words. Bi means two, and variate sounds like the word variable. And so we're dealing with data that talks about two variables. So bivariate data is just used to explore the relationship between two variables. A scatter plot is just a graph with points plotted to show the relationship between two sets of data. This is just going to be taking points and plotting them on a coordinate plane. An outlier is just a point that stands out from the others, and you've seen outliers in statistics before. They're points that are far away from the other points. A cluster is just a set of closely grouped data. You could think of a cluster like you have a cluster of grapes. They're closely grouped objects very close to each other. So a set of points that are closely grouped together are called a cluster. An association just describes how sets of data are related. We have three types of association that could be positive, negative, or no association. So notice in this coordinate plane that the points that are graphed are going up to the right. They're close to each other. Notice as the x values increase in number, the y values increase in number as well. So this is called a positive association. As the x values increase, the y values increase. Notice they both increase. They're doing the same thing. One's increasing, the other one's increasing. We could also say if the x values were decreasing, then the y values would also be decreasing, and it would look the same. Notice that this positive kind of looks similar to slope in that the trend is going up to the right. Notice this second graph. It appears to be going down to the right. It would be called a negative association. In a negative association, as x values increase, the y values decrease. So these are opposites. You might even say it the opposite way and say as x values decrease, y values increase. Notice that the trend of the points is going down to the right, so it's a negative association. It kind of looks like negative slope. In this third graph, if you look, you notice the points are all over the place. There doesn't appear to be any trend going up or going down or anything. It's just no trend. So we call that no association. There is no trend if there's no association. In our example, we're going to use the table to answer some questions. Part A says we're going to construct a scatter plot, and you're given a table here. So to construct a scatter plot, we're going to plot points on a coordinate plane. So in creating a scatter plot, we're first going to think about about how we would construct our x and y axes. Notice that they're all positive, so I only drew a first quadrant, quadrant 1. Scatter plots are almost always going to be just found in the first quadrant. Also notice that the table is represented in two different variables, hours of sleep and math test scores. And so if it doesn't state it, you can almost always assume that the first column could be represented by x and the second column by y. Also notice x is time, and time will almost always be your x's if it's given there. So I'm going to represent x as time, the hours of sleep. Notice that these numbers are all small. They go as low as 5 up to 10. So I could count by ones or twos since these are very small numbers. I'm going to count one at a time. So I've labeled them counting one at a time on my x-axis. This is my interval. The interval is very small. And I'm also going to label what x-axis is talking about. It's talking about the hours of sleep. That means that Y is going to represent the math test scores. And notice that these values range from 40 up to 100. So I could do a line break and skip up to 40, but I think I'm just going to include everything. And I wouldn't count by ones here. That would just take too many lines on my paper. So I think I'm going to count by tens. Counting by 20s would be okay as well, but something that would be reasonable to fit on your paper. So I've counted by tens on the y-axis, and I need to label it. It's talking about math test scores in percents, so that's what I'll label. And this does not specify, but I'm going to name this graph test performance. And it's the test performance based on sleep. And so we're going to go through and just start plotting these values as ordered pairs. Our first pair is an x value of 5 and a y value of 70. So I just plot that as an ordered pair, 5, 70. So I go to 5 on the x-axis, go up to 70, and I plot my point. And I'm going to cross it off because I've plotted it. That way I can keep up with where I'm at. Then I have 6, 75. 75 is halfway between 70 and 80. Plot my point, cross it off. 10, 40. Plot my point, cross it off. 8, 88. I can't tell exactly where 88 is, but I know it's a little under 90. Plotted my point and crossed it off. Then 6, 82. It's going to be just a little over 80. It's going to be, whoops, wrong place. It'll be about right here. Plotted my point and I crossed it off. Then 10, 100. 9, 95. 7, 75. 9, 90. And 6, 65. Now, if I were working this on my own, I would still go through and cross off my points as I go, just so that I don't accidentally lose my place and forget an ordered pair or duplicate something, just to make sure that I keep up with everything. So now all of these points have been plotted, and that is the scatter plot. We have done this. We have made a scatter plot. And all it is just plotting points from a table to a graph. Now we're going to use the scatter plot to help answer some additional questions. B part, where is an outlier found and what might be the cause? Well, remember, an outlier is a point that stands out from the others, and when you look at this coordinate plane, it's very obvious that this point here stands out from the other points. So I'm going to just label where that's found. It's found at 1040. And so we think about what could cause that. It's showing a student who had 10 hours of sleep, which you would expect to do well in a test, but that student only scored 40% correct. So if you think about it, maybe you've experienced this before. The student got a lot of sleep but didn't do well in a test. What could be another explanation for why the student didn't do well in a test? I think the student didn't study. So that would be what I would suggest, but you might have a different reason. So I said the student may not have studied. C part, is there a cluster? Remember, a cluster is a set of closely grouped data. If you look at the scatter plot, there appears to be a group of closely grouped data at these sets of values in blue, which is most of the data. And so, yes, there is a cluster. And we could describe where it's found. So I would first describe on the x-axis the hours of sleep. It's found between 5 and 10 hours of sleep. We can see that's the range of the x values. And that's between 65 and 100% on the scores. If we look at the y-axis, notice that the lowest one goes from about 65 up to about 100 on the scores. So we can just describe the cluster in terms of its x values and its y values. Our last question, is there an association? Well, we can look at a trend in the data and notice that in the cluster that the points are trending up to the right. As the x values increase, the y values increase, and it kind of makes a trend that looks like a positive slope. So is there an association? Yes. And we would say it was a positive association.